The biggest tech stories so far this year: Apple remaps itself, the sky is cracked in Fortnite, and how to be a white hat hacker. All that and more coming up on Tech News Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Weekly is brought to you by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 39, recorded Thursday, July 5th, 2018. Welcome. Hello. This is a show where we talk to the people making and breaking the tech news. Jason Howell is out this week, but I am Megan Maroney, and I am here. So let's get right to it. This week, we learned that Google is letting app developers read our Gmail. Now, if you expressed any shock about this in any certain techie circles, you might have been met with the response, well, that's what you signed up for. Joining us to talk about how this is, people are tiring of this excuse, is Ian Sherr, executive editor from CNET News. Welcome back to the show, Ian.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. So Google published a sort of apology. They said that they vetted all the developers and they encourage people to review who they've already given permission to. But some users say this isn't enough. But what's wrong with just telling someone like, hey, this is what you signed up for. If you don't like it, use another product.
Well, this underscores kind of where Silicon Valley and the rest of us kind of have this divide of understanding. I think there has been for many years this kind of crutch of, well, everyone pressed OK, so it must be OK. And the reality is that part of the reason now we are seeing a backlash forming in Washington, D.C., and certainly among many users, is that it's not OK. There isn't enough education of users happening here. And it's causing a lot of frustration. I remember when Unroll.me, you remember when that became a huge thing? It turned out that they were selling information gleaned from reading all of our receipts and our emails and everything. And a lot of people were shocked by that. And the response from Unroll.me was shock that everyone was shocked. And it's kind of, if you aren't doing enough to explain your business model and explain what you're doing and giving people access to, then you're going to have these backlashes keep happening.
So, I mean, this is part of many of these companies' business model. It's part of, I mean, when Facebook said they were going to turn around and do things differently, like, a lot of people ask, like, this is your business model. You make money from your ads and you have better ads because you're collecting this information. So, I mean, is there any way to change the way these companies work besides changing their business model?
I think if I had an answer, I'd be on Wall Street or working for them and making billions of dollars. I think this is very hard. This is an incredibly hard thing. And because the internet's been built around this basic business model of most of it's free, but you're giving up a lot of privacy, the idea of unrolling that and changing it into something different is going to be really hard. There are rumors that, for example, Facebook is looking into whether or not they'll offer a subscription. We'll see whether that actually turns into something. There is also talk of people like the European Union and even the US government, although I wouldn't bet on it, trying to start tamping down on this stuff. And it's going to be interesting to see whether or not any of this actually happens. One thing is for sure, at the very minimum, users need to be more aware of what's going on, which is part of the story we wrote on CNET. It's part of what everyone is starting to get really frustrated over Silicon Valley about, is that they just don't know what they're signing up for every time.
And so how do people, I mean, how do companies convince, how do they relay this information? I mean, it's a lot of legal information that they have to give us, yes, and we're not going to read it. So maybe this is another question that would put you on Wall Street if you knew the answer to it.
Yeah,
how do they do it? I mean, in a way that we can, I don't think they're purposely trying to keep this information from us, do you?
No, look, I wake up every day thinking people are trying to do good in the world. And I think that overwhelmingly, these people are not trying to, make us suddenly feel uncomfortable and give access to all of our information. I think what's happened is that there has been a growing divide between what people know and what's actually happening. And even though it's out there, you could read it, you could see it, it just isn't something people are learning. And so I think Silicon Valley needs to really go through an education campaign and make it much more easy. One of the things I loved about the European privacy law, GDPR, which kicked in a little while ago, is that it requires everything to make sense in plain and simple English, to explain it just in a way that anyone could. And look, even then it's really hard, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And going through that effort to make sure people understand what is going on is really, it's what needs to happen at this point.
And I mean, I use one of these email providers. I use Edison. And when I found out, I was like, oh, okay. And then I immediately stopped thinking about it. Like, part of it is not just that we know we signed up for, but we don't really care. Like, I mean, the Wall Street Journal headline, which was like, this is tech's dirty secret. Like, A, it's not really a secret, and B, like,
it's an open secret.
Yeah, we don't really, like, do we really care? Like, I mean, how do you get people to care more about, I mean, so no, someone's not really sitting down and reading my email, but I don't care what they're doing. It's an efficient email service, and I really like it.
Well, it's important to also point out that you, and I would argue a lot of the people that you and I talk to, are not the target market of this issue, right? It's really about people who don't understand how the tech industry works, but are continuously shocked to learn what it does. And I think that is where it's important, is that a lot of this backlash is actually coming from normal people who barely understand how technology works to begin with, but are being caught up in these choices and are making uninformed decisions, right? And that's the bottom line of it, is uninformed decisions. And so I think that what used to be, well, you know, it's their problem, is no longer enough of an excuse. And so I think we're going to start seeing, at least in terms of, again, regulators in Europe, regulators in DC, saying, well, actually, tech industry, it is on you to make sure that people at least know what they're signing up for.
So let's move on. CNET posted an article this week that had all of the biggest tech stories so far. I guess we're about halfway through the year. It's time for Prime Day and time for all the tech news thus far. What tops the list this year so far?
I mean, Cambridge Analytica is probably the easiest answer, right? And of course, you know, it just plays back into what we were just talking about. I mean, this has been one of the biggest scandals, and I think it underscores, frankly, not just the issues that Facebook faces, but also the fraying relationship between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. You know, there was this honeymoon period for decades where it was basically hands-off regulation, and the tech industry kind of did whatever it wanted, and, you know, within reason. There were a couple of efforts where, you know, the Microsoft going with the DOJ for a while, but for the most part, people were left alone. And now we're starting to see the rhetoric really changing, and a lot of it kind of came to the front and to the fore with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And I think that we're starting to see a larger kind of waking up within the population of what tech is doing with our information.
So today in California, net neutrality is apparently making a comeback, but that's at a state level. But net neutrality has been big in the news and going back and forth. What state is net neutrality in right now?
It's in a little bit of a flux, right? And we've written about this on CNET a lot, which is part of why Ajit Pai came to us and did an op-ed with us the day that net neutrality was kind of over. But, you know, I think that right now the hard part is that a number of states are saying, look, we want net neutrality, including California, although, you know, we can debate how that's played out so far. But a number of states are saying, look, we want some form of this, because whether or not the FCC believes that this needs to be done, we believe it does. And so we're seeing a number of states try and push this issue, but there's also seems to be a resistance from the federal government to see it happen. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, you know, does the law eventually become, you know, that the actual Congress has to vote on it? That was part of the debate too, by the way, was that whether or not Congress should be forced to vote on this instead of the FCC having a rule on it. And so I think that, you know, we're in that point where, okay, well, there's been a step backwards for people who are really big fans of net neutrality, but I think that there's much more debate happening, and we're going to see much more push from people who are proponents of it in the next couple of months and years.
A lot of these stories, what they have in common is the politics, the overlapping of politics and technology.
Absolutely.
You know, it's, you know, people really don't like, a lot of people don't like it when tech reporters talk about politics, but there's so much overlap. The ZTE story is another big one so far. Tell us what's going on with that right now.
Yeah, so you may remember ZTE was basically placed, you know, got hit by sanctions because the government said that they were selling products to Iran, which was against U.S. sanction laws. And so what ended up happening was that it looked like for a while ZTE was going to get shut down, and then President Trump and the administration stepped in to actually save them. And it became its own meme and conversation about, saving Chinese jobs for a company that specifically has been criticized by our own government and our own security agencies and whatnot over its practices. And so it just raises these larger issues that I think really underscores where the tech industry is at this point, is that, it's become such a part of our lives that it's everywhere. And of course, we're seeing so much more politics play into it.
Mm-hmm. And then Tesla, how's Tesla's year going so far?
It's quite a bit of a kind of a hill and valley type situation, right? I mean, the Model 3 came out, got really good reviews, then there were mixed reviews, then there's all sorts of other stuff going on. And not to mention, you've got Elon Musk himself, who's become quite the Twitterer, and he always was, but it became part of a conversation topic about the kind of people who follow him and how when he would criticize journalists, which he's done more of recently, and he actually even started a company or whatever you want to call it to criticize journalists and to hold them accountable in his point of view, that the people who follow him started attacking the journalists. And we saw all sorts of really nasty things happening. And so there's a lot of weirdness happening around Tesla right now that I think is very different from what the company was like a year ago in terms of how it's seen in the public eye. And when you consider that the company does not do that much marketing, it primarily relies, it said this in its own filings with the SEC, it relies heavily on goodwill with the press and word of mouth marketing through reviews, that when that stuff starts to turn on them, it's a really dangerous thing for them. And I think that's what you're seeing a reaction to.
Mm-hmm. Well, Charles in our chat room said that the problem with tech reporters talking about politics is that we're all liberal militants. So as a liberal militant, I heard Laurel. Did you hear Yanny or did you hear Laurel?
So I was definitely in the Laurel camp. And look, it took until you saw that New York Times slider thing they had, right, which I thought was the most genius thing anyone did, where they actually had a slider on their website where you could actually make it hear Yanny or Laurel, depending on where you sit on the spectrum, and it would force it. And it was the only time I ever heard it. But I'm also a weirdo. I saw a black dress. I didn't see a blue one. So I'm going to be in the minority, it seems, for a long time.
Well, yeah, I just want that to end. I was I have to say, a little saddy, and that showed up in your piece, because I don't want to hear about it anymore. And it's like it's like people really want to read so much into it, and I just feel like it's about the speaker, right? Like, it's what kind of speaker you're listening to.
Oh, I disagree. And here's why people want to read about it, by the way. I think people love stories about the human condition. I think people love seeing these little things that just really emphasize how we're different but the same, right? And I personally love those stories too. I think that's why it went viral even within my own family. And so that's really what people are gleaming on, is that, there are some times where, our tribal politics and, all these things kind of get in the way, but, everyone at one point can get involved. Even the Speaker of the House came down on Yanny and Laurel, and everyone laughed when he did. And I think that underscores just kind of, it brings us all together in a weird way and shows how we and our bodies are different from how we perceive them sometimes. That's really fun.
You've convinced me. I'm just ready for it to be something else. Like, it can be a blue dress again or whatever it is.
Well, at one point these things tire out, and I will totally agree with you there. But I love it when these things happen. I think they're really fun, personally.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for joining us. Ian Sherr is an executive editor at CNET News. You can find him at Ian Sherr. That's IANSHERR on Twitter. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Take care. Over the weekend, TechCrunch had a scoop about Apple rebuilding Maps from the ground up. I read this piece and I wasn't sure if it was kind of a thinly veiled promo piece for Apple or hinted at some future Apple car that I really want. So I reached out to my favorite consumer tech analyst, Carolina Milanesi from Creative Strategies. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And did I pronounce your name right this time? Carolina.
You did, Carolina.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Thanks. I was working on it. So you tweeted this story about Apple Maps. You said it was really about Apple being in control of their own future, not just for maps, but for autonomous driving in whatever shape or form that is going to be. Tell us what you meant by that.
Yeah, I think that we know the story, right? Apple went with a third-party map. It would have taken too long for them to come up with their own mapping, and they had a choice to make. Now, I think the stakes are higher because it's not just about navigation. Location has become a much more important piece of the puzzle, if you like, not just about the consumer, but for the future of move in whatever sense you want to think about it, commuting, transportation, and the whole part of connected cities and smart cities that we have. So I think in good old-fashioned Apple way, they want to be more in control of that. They want to be more in control of how they update maps, how they design maps, how the rollout of different location is going to come in. And they've been investing apparently for the past 4 years, because this is not an easy fix. And that, I think, is what most consumers are concerned about.
Well, it's not an easy fix for Apple, too, because they're the company that, we're not going to use your personal data. We're not going to, send it up to the cloud. Everything stays on your device. And so when they talked to Matthew Panzarino from TechCrunch, who had this scoop, they said that they still weren't going to. There was he had some details about how it's going to be anonymous. But do you think it's possible to get something as good as Google Maps or Waze without using more of our personal information, our location data?
Well, it depends how you're thinking about it, right? So you can get good maps from data that everybody is going to be contributing to in an anonymous way. So in other words, Apple doesn't need to know that Megan gets coffee at a certain place, or that I go and, do something else, pick up my daughter from a school or whatever it is. They can use the data to make their maps better without necessarily going back to me. I'm still unclear, to be honest with you, how they're able to do certain things, like, for instance, giving me the time for me to go from home to school as soon as I get in the car at around 7:30 in the morning, because that's what normally my iPhone says. So there must be some level of data that they are using to give the consumer a better service, a smart service. And I think that most consumers are okay with that. We've been talking about this for the past 2 years, that consumers trust Apple, and they trust Apple to use data that they share for their own benefit. What they don't expect from Apple, which is where privacy comes in, is for Apple to share that information with third parties. And that distinction sometimes, I think, gets lost. Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. So Apple Maps vans, now the Panzarino got to ride around in one, and he said it was sort of a souped up version. It wasn't similar to Google Maps. Do you think that means that they're working on some sort of autonomous driving technology, or do you think this is all about maps?
It seems weird that they've gone so far without invest over the last 4 years using third party, and now they're changing. If there's not something cooking on the autonomous driving side, either for the car that you so much want, or for services of some sort, even if it's initially just for vans that transport their own employees back and forth from San Francisco, who knows? Mm-hmm. But it does seem that this has a role to play, and so does AR.
Well, how do you think that they would be using it? What would be the outcome for using it for AR?
From an AR perspective, more and more location and mapping plays a role. And so if you're thinking about Pokemon Go, as everybody kind of uses that as an example of successful AR, the more you know about the world, the more that game becomes engaging. And so there's definitely value to be added to an AR experience when you know location and you control a mapping experience.
So everybody, whenever there's a story about Apple Maps, everyone loves to talk about how bad it was in the beginning. And I use it now. It sounds like you use it now. It's fine. Is that because we live in the Bay Area? Is it better here than it is other places?
Absolutely. I think that does play certainly a role. And even with this next phase that Apple is rolling out, they have mentioned that San Francisco will be, and the Bay Area, their first area, because that's where they have the vans and the cars deployed. That's where they have the majority of users. It's interesting that if you talk to Apple, they'll say that Apple Maps is the most used map app in iOS at a worldwide level. But when it comes to North America, Google is actually ahead. If we look at our own number of creative strategies, the split between iOS and Google on iOS devices was 46% for Google, 35% for Apple. So not too far away, but definitely still with Google ahead. But of course, there are places like China where Google is not present, and China is a very important market for Apple.
Mm-hmm. The other big Apple news today was that the rumor that Apple's going to be coming out with different colored new iPhones, perhaps even orange. What do you make of that?
I think that color has definitely become a key feature at the moment. As you know, the designs are more and more the same. Vendors have started to invest again in colors. And for Apple in the past, if you look at the rose gold and then you look at the white with the latest iPhone 10, new colors have actually helped with the upgrade cycle. So people, changing their old for new. And I always say that even when you buy a car, you might love a brand and a specific car, but you at least change your color so people notice.
Well, I just have I really like the rose gold, but I just have a rose gold case because you need a case anyway, so it doesn't really matter to me what color it is.
You do, but I think people get still proud of getting something new that looks different. Yeah, they slap a case on because otherwise you're going to end up breaking it.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, everybody, we want the new thing so we can prove, when the next iPhone 10 comes out in rose gold, everyone will want it because then, they know it's brand new. It's not old-fashioned. That's right. 2018, 2017 phone. So have you been running, I know it sounds like you're running the betas at least on an iPad or two. Are you running them on your phones as well?
I am, yeah. I'm running both the public beta on my iPad and my phone.
I know you did tweet about how your daughter is not a fan of screen time. I said, do you have it set so it turns off, or she just has to ask for more time? How do you have that working?
Yeah, so my vision was that she's 10 and was that she was going to be, self-monitor herself. I was so mistaken. And so we are doing she can ask for an extended period. So she would ask for an extra 15 minutes. But it's like going to bed, and you say, it's time to go to bed. Another 5 minutes, and you give them 5 minutes, and then it's another 5 minutes. And then, lastly, when it's like, no, you're going to bed now, then there is that hate coming through. And it's the same thing with screen time, is the 15 minutes and then another 15 minutes, and then everything shuts off if I don't give her permission. And that's just for gaming. So if she wanted to go and read a book, she could go and do that. But of course, it's Minecraft that she wants to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's similar to my family situation. I think I tweeted at you that it was good because they did, it does make them notice, and it makes me notice how much time I spend with my device as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the first step, right? Being aware, because everybody in our family jokes about my sense of time, which is always to my favor. So she doesn't trust me when I say, oh, it's been an hour and a half. And now she can see it, for herself with the device. And yeah, it's sad because it works for us too. So I can see that I spend the first hour of every day just on Twitter. And that's usually before coffee, which is not really a good thing to do.
Yeah, I use the Moment app. I haven't dared to put iOS 12 on my iPhone yet. So, but the Moment app is really helpful because it'll say like you've been on your phone for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and it's true, like you're still just drinking your coffee and have accomplished nothing else in the day. Well, thank you so much, Carolina, for coming on. Carolina Milanesi is a consumer tech analyst at Creative Strategies. She does it's a weekly piece that you do catching up on the news, right?
I do. I do a piece on Wednesday. Usually I skip yesterday because I was too busy building IKEA furniture for my daughter. Yeah, I usually have a Wednesday column on techpinions.com. And then I do a piece on Friday for subscribers where I talk about maybe the least public news that might have escaped your attention.
Yeah, it's a great little piece. I noticed you're doing some smart home stuff as well. I noticed that you have some Amazon Echo lights that you set up.
I did this morning. I had this thing about repurposing some. So they've been in the house attached to something else, and I decided to repurpose them. And I was just complaining on Twitter of how still painful this process is. And for mass market adoption, it really does need to get easier. And it's not easier in terms of like it is complicated or complex. It's because there are so many steps, and some of the stuff that still doesn't work is basic Wi-Fi or basic Bluetooth or resetting. Nobody wants to spend 45 minutes to set up a plug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. My new law is, and whatever problem your IoT creates, it has to be bigger. That it can't be bigger than the problem you're using it to solve. So
absolutely, yes, that's a very, very good way to put it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You can find more about Carolina at Caro, CARO _ Milanesi, MILANESI on Twitter, or Creative Strategies or Tech Pinions. She has a great follow on Twitter if you want to just be kept up on all the news. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sure. See you soon.
Take care. In our Twit production meeting this week, Leo offhandedly mentioned that someone had launched a rocket and it had cracked the sky. Imagine my surprise until I realized that he was not talking about real life, but Fortnite. I needed to get to the bottom of this Fortnite sky-cracking mystery. So who am I going to call? Sam Machkovech from Ars Technica, of course. Welcome back, Sam.
Happy post-4th to everyone at the Twit family. How's it going?
It's going well. So what is going on in Fortnite, and do I need to be worried?
I mean, things change so rapidly in Fortnite that, yes, you should generally be worried because every single child in the nation is playing this game. And so I think if they slipped in a subliminal code to tell everyone to kill their parents and take their money, it would happen. And then Epic would make millions of dollars doing it. But in this case, this sort of rapid fire feature stuff that's coming up in Fortnite came to a head with a limited time event where you had to be in the game at a certain time in order to see this sky crack open in this crazy event. Again, one time in terms of whatever time it was around the world, you had to get into the game and log in and play. And the result didn't make everyone happy because when you do something only one time in a game where everyone but one person dies on a regular basis, it doesn't quite go well. So everyone who had gotten excited, who'd set their timers and got in the game, might not have seen this rocket cracking the sky craziness because they died. In some cases, that just meant that they got into the game and got killed before they could get to this moment and see this thing happen, or they were on the other side of the game's giant map, or in one case that I heard about, the bunch of people sort of decided to be friendly and watch the event and actually get into a crowd. It was this sort of strange, tranquil bit of peace inside of a game like Fortnite, which is normally 100 people all descending and they're all trying to be the last person standing. Well, you've got 30, 40 people, give or take, standing around. Someone shows up with a rocket launcher and blows them all up. It sounds like the kind of thing that MMO games have dealt with for years in terms of sort of timed events and people coming in and trolling and griefing them. So I think the primary issue is that by making it such a limited time wild event that people sort of felt left in the cold. I think that Epic could very easily just repeat this crazy event or have other ones pop up on occasion, and it'll all be fine. It was an easy thing to complain about. I think if even the slightest thing goes wrong in Fortnite, you can expect tens of thousands of people to whine just a little bit.
That's rude. That's like looting a store during the eclipse or something. That everybody's enjoying this moment.
That's a good idea because everyone's got the glasses on. They can't even see.
Don't do that.
You're brilliant.
Okay, so you mentioned just earlier before we turned the cameras on that people were making money in Fortnite. Now, you can't actually make money in the game. You're talking about like YouTubers on their YouTube channel. You can't make money in the game, right?
Not that I know of,
Okay.
in terms of the way the marketplace works. No, I'm talking about professional streamers who there was a Ninja. I think is perhaps the best known simply because he played a video game with the rapper Drake. That's really all it takes. I keep waiting for him to return my calls. And that member of the Twitch community took a couple of days off during E3. This was a story back earlier in June, and he reportedly lost tens of thousands of subscribers and therefore potential revenue because he stopped streaming for a couple of days. And he posted about it not in a woe is me, my life is so bad, but more of this reminder that, oh yeah, Twitch is this kind of strange beast where people expect this content all the time. They want to be able to turn on their phone or their game system or computer and see their favorite personality playing their favorite game at the time slot they expect, and apparently lost revenue as a result. So, and I think we're going to see way more stories about that in the coming years as more of these sites had tip jars and subscriptions to sort of their video streaming services. We're going to see so much of that, but I could go on and on and on about that stuff.
Okay, so I've been getting in trouble lately. Some people have been accusing me of like being anti-gaming or, anti-tech. And so it's probably because we haven't talked, because you're a real gamer and I need you to give me some of your cred. So is there anything wrong with Fortnite? Like, is there anything, because like I have heard that it's a little bit like addicting, maybe just the way it's set up. What are your thoughts on
I think any online video game should be handled with care when it comes to being young, because an online game is an entirely different ecosystem of variables that you cannot predict. So long as people can type in it or do anything inside of the interface, people will find a way to game things that you're not quote unquote supposed to be able to do. Children love to learn and exploit systems, which is why video games are so great, because you get a controller and you're told you can only do this and this, and gamers say, no, I can come up with more. I can find the secrets. I can get through all of the stuff. And I think that's really good for kids in order to have these cool spaces to go around and explore. But when that involves other people running up to you and planting their virtual crotches on faces, that's a really innocent way of doing it. There's a lot more to me that's about how does Fortnite extend into the rest of your personal life? Are you watching the game all the time? Are you sneaking gameplay under the desk and not getting other stuff done? Are you, the darkest stuff was joining communities that seem innocent, that are about tips about Fortnite and turn out to be sort of mass breeding grounds for really poisonous trains of thought, is sort of the nicest way of putting it. Communities can just pop up and take advantage of eager kids who want to know more about their favorite game and therefore the world. So I think the game itself, if played with parents, is a comic book shooter kind of game. And I think parents can decide at what age they think it's appropriate to let their kids shoot guns at anything in a game, let alone its AI or other people in the world. So I think handle with care and make sure that's a shared experience that everyone sort of sees, here's what's happening. Fortnite in particular has a lot of building and constructing, which I think can be cool. Minecraft is an incredible way to get kids moving their brains around and thinking how to use virtual space in interesting ways. And I say it in that weird way because that's sort of training for a future job. The guy who created Tetris talked about how sports of old, athletic sports, are training for athletic kind of work. Video games are sort of the same way. So I think if a game is popular and lets kids sort of be creative and mess around with virtual crap, yes, do more of it. Join with it as parents. You all can play together. One person on a Switch, one person on an Xbox, nobody on a PlayStation 4 because they don't do cross-platform. That sort of thing.
So your colleague Dan Gooden wrote a piece about malware. Like a bunch of people were susceptible from malware. Was that like how did that happen? Fortnite players.
Yeah, this story is interesting because when you read it, you can see a headline that says Fortnite players get caught with malware. What the real meat of it is people who wanted to cheat and exploit Fortnite had installed some abilities to look through walls, auto-aim, some of these sort of hacks that are not allowed. And you are promised these extra boosts by installing a program, which Epic supposedly is combing the internet looking for. They hunt for this specific kind of weird activity and weird exploits on their EXE and blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't know if they did catch this one or not, but this specific exploit just started installing stuff on people's computers to essentially work like other standard malware of using those as zombie computers to attack other clients. So I think the lesson there, don't ever give permission to an EXE that you do not trust and know. And that's certainly less about Fortnite and more about enterprising malware distributors finding the next thing that gets people to click yes on an EXE. I mean, they've been doing that since the 90s in terms of crappy JPEGs installed or set into an email that turned out to be viruses, EXEs, executables, and all that stuff. So it worked. Kids and dumb people clicked on it, and that's their butt, and they got caught there. And Dan has a lot more of the technical breakdown about that. I remember he talked to me about it and said, it's not really about the game, but as you and I know, every piece of malware needs something attractive, some sort of carrot to dangle. And Lord help us whenever Pokemon Go suffers from one of those.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so put on your ESP hat. How long is this Fortnite mania going to last? Do I have to learn more about it in order to talk to normal people?
As soon as you start playing the game, it's over, Megan.
That's probably true. It is probably true.
No, that's always a tough estimate. And Epic is working really hard to pump a ton of different stuff into the game. That feeling of whenever you log in, something is different. I think they know darned well that this sort of mania can run out at any moment, especially because it's free to play. When you've gotten an audience in such a fickle manner where they can just jump in, join with their friends, maybe toss $5-10 at a time, that kind of player will run away so quickly. Just talk to Farmville and every other Facebook game trend that exploded in the mid to late aughts. So it really is just about sort of a next big thing. PUBG was interesting when it blew up because it required a $30 entry. That was not free to play, and it wound up cracking all the charts, and that did well for a while. And if people say it's fizzling out and fading, but they made their money and they're still making more money. Mm-hmm. Fortnite could honestly go the other way at any point, and I think they're going to be a little bit more in the hole, even though they are making gazillions of dollars. So it's a hard thing to predict. It's going to be whenever some big trend comes up. I think honestly, it's going to be the next good phone game. There's going to be some sort of shooter game that's going to work on phones. That's what I think is going to blow up. And I think all of the big companies out there are looking at how good iPhones are in general, how good Android phones are in general. There's this sort of baseline that teenagers own these kinds of phones that are good enough where you can tap with like virtual buttons on a screen. They're doing it in Fortnite and like it. I just think there's going to be something similar that's suited directly for the phone, and every kid is going to install it. That's going to be the one. When that really happens, that's when Fortnite is in trouble. So
like the popularity you think is really tied into the fact that right now, like even 11-year-olds have really great iPhones.
Absolutely, which is insane. I'm very jealous of, including my nephews.
Well, let's move on to the story that you posted, speaking of 11-year-olds. Amazon is publishing a toy catalog?
That is what Bloomberg is reporting. I think that's the source. I'm totally blanking. But there was one of the business outlets that we read a lot had posted a story about their sources saying a toy catalog is going to come this holiday season. And it's not going to come from Toys R Us, at least in the United States, since that chain is completely dissolved and all their stores have gone out of business in the United States and all of that. Amazon is now itching to get into that game of publishing a giant catalog full of toys and only toys in time for this holiday season. Their sources are looking at millions that are going to be sent in the mail to Amazon shoppers, which is going to be easy enough since Amazon has all their addresses, and also going to be handed out at, guess where, Whole Foods. Wherever else they'll be distributed, we don't know. Amazon is yet to confirm that this is the case, but we also don't know exactly how big the book is going to be, and perhaps most importantly, if it's going to have any pricing information, because as anyone who goes to Amazon knows, that toy is going to cost something different on a day-to-day basis, and whether or not you're a Prime customer. So that'll be a weird wrinkle that Amazon has to deal with by publishing something like a toy catalog. But I think as any enterprising parent knows, those toy catalogs aren't about the prices. They're about getting a bunch of pictures of toys into kids' heads that they get to flip through over and over and over. I'm a child of the 80s, which means the Sears catalog was a crucial part of my Christmas begging every year.
So is there any sense that they're going to sell these in actual like open stores, open brick and mortar Amazon stores?
Well, they have Amazon Books, which has its share of knickknacks and obviously Echo-style devices. They've got Whole Foods, which I think it would be very easy for them to set up shelves of this sort of stuff. This could be a way to tease that forward. Amazon Go doesn't really exist in many places. Well, only one. A second Amazon Go store was just spotted in Seattle this week as well. It's going to open this fall. It was actually a photo of a second-story building with a little crack in the window that showed a sign, and Amazon had to admit that that's what it was when they got caught with it. But I honestly think it's up to Amazon how much they want to use Whole Foods, because that is their foot in the door, figuratively and literally. And I really do think that if it's not this Christmas season, it'll be next, where you start to see these sort of seasonal cute sign displays that get put into stores that try to take advantage of that market leverage. It's sort of the treasure truck strategy that they've been using to get certain kind of seasonal products in big city markets. I just got a thing on my phone today telling me here in Seattle that there's this Foursquare trampoline weird bouncy ball game that they were selling for 40% off, calling it the hit of the summer. And I honestly see Whole Foods being the next place where they kind of pump out those limited time, super discount, come to Whole Foods by this hour today kind of discount.
Did you get the trampoline?
Nah, I'm good.
Sam, thank you as always for joining us. Sam Machkovech is the culture editor at Ars Technica. He is at Sam Red on Twitter. We'll hopefully talk to you very soon.
Indeed. And by the way, my Ant-Man and the Wasp review goes live at Ars Technica tomorrow. It is good. Check it out and tomorrow morning for more on that.
Okay. Is the movie's good or the review's good? Or both?
The movie and the review, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I wrote the review, so of course it's a great review.
Right, exactly. Okay. All right. See you soon. Earlier this month, security researcher Vinny Troia discovered nearly 2 terabytes of unsecured data from marketing firm Exactus. The data appeared to include personal information on hundreds of millions of American adults and millions of businesses, including phone numbers, home addresses, email addresses, and even personal characteristics. Joining us to talk about how he made this discovery is Vinny Troia, CEO and principal security consultant of Nightline Security. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So walk us through how you came upon this leak of information.
Sure. So I'm pretty familiar with a specific type of database called Elasticsearch. And I guess it occurred to me that there were quite a number of open Elasticsearch installations here in the US. So I pulled a list of something like maybe, 7,000 companies that had their data exposed. So I literally just started going down the list and scraping a bunch of them and just seeing what kind of information they had. And I came across the Exactus servers. And then once I started poking around, I noticed, well, hey, there's kind of a pretty good amount of information here. And so once I started looking at what the data actually was, I mean, it occurred to me that it was, it was a US database. It seemed like a marketing database, but I mean, it had pretty much everybody in there.
So how many work hours is that? Like, does that take you an hour, 12 hours, 3 weeks? How long are you, how long is that?
That's a pretty good question. The short answer is I don't know. Because, it's just one of those things where, one night I wrote the script, another night I kind of set it off, and I think it was running for a couple days before I actually looked at it again. And then, going through the data takes a few days just to see kind of all the stuff that's out there. So, I mean, it probably took me a solid few weeks of work to find it. But, once I identified kind of what it was, it came together quickly at that point. But I mean, I guess getting to that point, probably I'd say a solid few weeks.
So I know you have like over 20 years of experience in IT security and software development. And how long have you been doing this sort of work that you're doing now? Like just the white hat hacker work. How long have you been doing that?
I'd say probably for most of my time at this point, because I got started doing like software development and web coding, and a lot of the hacking work that I did at that point was just trying to break the software that we had written. So there's always kind of like this element of hacking our own stuff. So I'd say I've pretty much been doing this all my life. And when I got started years ago, I think maybe 11 or 12 when I got my first computer. We didn't really have much to do, right? So, hacking into, phone lines and, seeing kind of what systems were on the other end was, I guess, kind of second nature to us. So I guess I've pretty much been doing this my whole life.
And so are things getting better or harder? Are you noticing things are getting harder to crack or easier?
Some things are getting harder. Some things are pretty much staying the same. There's plenty of instances where, like in this case with Exactus, I mean, there wasn't anything to crack. I mean, it was just sitting there, right? So, if there had been a username or even a password in front of the thing, I never would have found it. So, in some respects, there are some things that are pretty walled up. I mean, the technology's really improved a lot. It's just, do people actually use it, or do people take the time to, do what needs to be done to secure their systems, which I think is kind of the problem we're running into now.
So what you're saying is there's so much data out there. Really, your job at this point is to figure out how to find it.
Yeah, I mean, I had some free time, and I decided to write a couple scripts, and and I found it. I mean, I wouldn't say this is my job day to day, but now, I mean, a lot of what I do, kind of with Nightline Security, is, I mean, I work with customers, and we try to find creative ways to break into their systems. I mean, that's I guess kind of what I'm known for, and that's what they pay me for. So, more often than not, they don't have this level of, most people don't have this level of data, period. But I mean, the ones that do, I mean, they don't just have it sitting there, right? But it's very, I guess, few and far between that I'll actually get a chance to work on something kind of cool and just different like this.
So yeah, we should talk a little bit more about the leak itself. I'm just fascinated by by white hat hacking. But the information had not, I mean, everything that I just described before, but also like gender of children, adults, children, and other like really like this is marketing stuff, like stuff that usually you wouldn't want any of this known. But I mean, what did you do with it once you found it? And like, what's the next step after you found it? That's a pretty good question. So once I found it, I started going through it, right, to figure out, I mean, because I mean, there was so much data that it seemed the size was just unusual, right? I mean, to see 2 terabytes of data, right? I mean, finding a way to scrape all that just isn't necessarily easy. So then once I started looking through it, I mean, like you said, I mean, there was a lot of, so when I just went back and did a tally the other day, it turns out there were about 300 fields per user. And so we're talking about things like, do you have a Visa card? Do you have an Amex? Do you have a Discover? Do you have a retail card, a gas card? Do you have kids? Do you have pets, cats, dogs? Are you, a woman worker? Are you a male, worker? Or do you, are you into outdoor activities? Do you smoke? Do you contribute to political campaigns? I mean, just anything you can think of. I mean, it was just so in depth. And so starting to look through all that, I mean, it's a little dizzying at first, honestly. But, once you kind of get a handle on everything that they're looking for, I mean, it's certainly interesting data. And then I started just putting in my info, and I started looking up some of my friends to see if they were in there. And I mean, everybody I looked up was in there. And then I started looking up celebrities, of course, and they were all in there. And so I figured, now we've got considering I've got 100% hit rate, I'd say I'm fairly confident that, this is pretty much all the U.S. citizens, or at least pretty much every household. And then, I contacted my buddy Andy at Wired, and just kind of told them about it, and that's kind of how we ended up here. So was the information about you accurate in your friends? Yeah. It was. Oh.
It was, yeah. I mean, a lot of there were a lot of fields that were like unknown fields. Like do I contribute to political campaigns, or any of the. Am I an outdoor person? I mean, there were a lot of views for unknown, but the stuff like my name, my address, my phone number, my date of birth. There was also a field for age at the time of the directory building or whatever, which gave me a pretty good sense that it was put together last year. So the data is not terribly old, but I mean, all of that stuff was spot on. I mean, my phone number was accurate. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty accurate.
So your buddy Andy, of course, is Andy Greenberg at Wired. So before he published the story, did they lock up the information?
Yeah, so I did forget to mention that. So I was able to get in touch with Exactus. I told them kind of what was going on. And within minutes of me kind of telling them that I found this data, I mean, they pretty much shut it down. So, I can't say whether or not they knew it was open, or if it was an oversight. I mean, I really have no idea. But once I told them how I found it, I mean, they shut it down pretty quickly.
So I am surprised at how little I heard about this. I mean, this is likely every U.S. citizen is in there. Are we just in like hack fatigue? Like, are we just like, well, it's all out there, who cares at this point?
Honestly, I think so. I mean, I think the media is so over inundated with just breaches every other day. I mean, it's almost like, well, if you hear about a breach of 150 million records, well, that's not big enough to make the news anymore. Now it's got to be, every U.S. citizen, or there's got to be, 2 billion records from whoever. You know what I mean? So I think people are just kind of numb to all this data breach. So I'm just not sure that, I don't want to say that nobody cares, because it is a serious issue. But I think most people in their households maybe just assume at this point that their information is out there and there's just nothing they can do about it.
But I mean, we talked earlier about the story in the Wall Street Journal about, the tech's open secret that app developers are reading your email. But, these are vetted app developers. But anyone, if came upon that information that you found, could create a really elaborate social engineering scam and basically get anything they want from anyone.
Well, and that's just it. Yeah, I mean, just because your social security number is not in this doesn't necessarily mean that it's not invaluable or not valuable information, right? If I was going to send out a phishing campaign to targeted people, well, now I know what their interests are, what kind of things they like to do, and I'd probably create some phishing emails that are a little more tailored towards them to increase my click ratios. It would take a little bit more work, but it would be worth it if the success rate goes up, which it would. Then you can start looking at, okay, well, if we know their interests, we can probably figure out what some of the main sites they go on, and now we can go on other websites to find their passwords. I mean, we can, take their email address, and we can, go to any number of websites to find passwords. And then maybe we could start logging into them. And then from there, it just kind of cascades. So there's quite a bit of damage that can be done from these type of lists for sure.
So you said that this was just something you did in your spare time. Is this not you have another full-time job than this?
Well, I mean, from the respect of, I've got to run a business too sometimes, right? So, that takes a little bit of time, and, I'm always kind of meeting with customers and meeting with clients, and, going out and scraping the web looking for interesting and unusual data isn't something I often have a lot of free time to do. So I'm just, I'm kind of glad I did it. But I'd say the majority of my time is spent, we do a lot of work with financial institutions. So, we're always trying to break into banks, for example, or trying to find clever ways to get people at the banks to send us money that they shouldn't. We often work on our own social engineering campaigns where we try to, initiate like fraudulent transactions or things like that, things that the banks should be stopping, so we can test out how good their defenses are. So I'm actively involved in a lot of those things for sure.
Well, I mean, most people, when they have some spare time, they watch some Netflix or something, but you just...
Well, I do that too.
Thank you so much for joining us. Vinny Troia is a certified computer hacking forensic investigator with over 20 years of experience. You can find out more at vinnytroia.com. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
And finally, for those of us in warm climates, here's a story for you. According to Popular Science magazine, scientists have just found the coldest natural temperatures on the planet. Meteorologists say the coldest place on Earth sits atop the eastern Antarctic plateau, 2 miles above sea. You might ask, as I did, isn't this something that we knew already? Apparently, we knew around where the coldest spot was, but by analyzing data from 2 NASA satellites measured against ground observation at Antarctic Research Station, temperatures reached between -144 and -146 degrees. That's very cold. When the circumstances were just right, that was how they got it. The weather has to be right. It has to be right for a few weeks, and then it gets to be that temperature. And meteorologists say that the temperatures just below -145 are the limits of the planet's natural range. So we're not going to go much lower than that. Tech News Weekly records live every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific at twit.tv/live. You can watch. And then you can be part of our show by sending us an email at tnw@twit.tv. You can subscribe to our show at twit.tv/tnw. And I would love it if you also subscribed to Know How. We had our first episode of the new season, 12 Weeks of IoT. You can do that at twit.tv/KH. It's Florence, Ion, and myself. And you can tweet at me. You can tell me how cold it is where you are. I'm at Megan Maroney. And Jason Howell will be back next week. Thank you very much to Victor for TDing this show. And thank you to Victor, who probably is also editing it. And thank you to Burke, who's coming right here to give me a high five. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next week on Tech News Weekly.